In this series, we've seen how Mary, in one act, has been generous with her time, attention, wealth, talents, possessions, and people's perceptions. And now we come to the final generosity, generous with her comfort. Part of the challenge of leading a generous life is that it takes us out of our comfort zone in so many ways. We have less for ourselves if we give more to others. We have to forego things we want so others can have things they need. It can also be about giving up things we want because of the joy they can bring to others. And sometimes living generously has a practical, physical dimension to it. There's an inescapable physicality to being generous with comfort, because it is all about foregoing that comfort for the benefit of others. Now, back in the day, I had, perhaps unwisely, decided I would sign up to cycle from London to Paris, a ride of nearly 300 miles. It was to raise money for the charity I work for, and I loved cycling, so it seemed a good idea. I should stress that I have a natural aversion to any kind of physical exercise. Being a member of a local gym was probably amongst the most unhappiest things I've ever done, so it was a significant commitment. Now, whilst I didn't actually like the physical exercise bit, I really enjoyed buying the kit I would need. All the gear, no idea, is a personal mantra. So I turn up to my first training session on a cold and wet January late afternoon, hopelessly unfit, but at least dressed and equipped for the part. I should perhaps have remembered the Mark Twain quote about cycling. Learn to ride a bike. You will not regret it if you live. I'm cycling in a group and the weather starts to deteriorate as dusk arrives. And as we head for home, it is sleeting, dark and freezing cold. Splashing through the puddles with grim determination and desperation, I notice, too late, that one hides a pothole. I hit it full on and come crashing to the ground. My fellow cyclists come to my aid, but I am tangled up in my bike and the fear is my leg is broken, so I can't be moved. The weight of the bike on the leg is excruciating. So one of my teammates sits on the freezing cold road, holding the bike up so it doesn't rest on my leg, for 20 minutes, whilst waiting for the ambulance to arrive. Now that is being generous with comfort, putting aside your own physical comfort for the benefit of another. And that is the last of the generosities we are exploring in this episode. When Mary anoints Jesus' feet and wipes them with her hair, she must have been down in the dust and the dirt, and it can't have been pleasant. She took on the position of a servant, willingly because she could not have shown her love without doing so. She gave up her comfort in that moment to serve Jesus, and he would soon be giving up his life. In Luke 22, Jesus finds the disciples arguing amongst themselves over who is the greatest disciple. The timing is curious. It's directly after the Last Supper, where Jesus says that his very body will be given for them. Jesus talks of his sacrifice, of his giving up everything for them, and in response, the disciples argue over who is the greatest disciple. Now, in this story in Matthew, Jesus goes on to say, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. It will not be so among you. But whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be your slave, just as the Son of Man came not to be served but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." This is a repeated theme throughout Jesus' ministry, telling the disciples they must reimagine the way life should be, that the last will be first, that the servant is as important as the king. This wasn't an abstract intellectual notion, it had a real physical reality to it. This is something that is lived out as a way of living out our faith, and as a pointer to it. Jesus' washing of the disciples' feet, which we explored earlier in the series, is the most graphic way of illustrating this. This belief needs to be lived out, seen, experienced and felt if people are to understand it. So too in this story where Mary kneels at Jesus' feet to anoint them. She doesn't just adopt the position of a servant, she is a servant, living out exactly the teachings of Jesus throughout his ministry. The nature of our faith is that sometimes we need to step outside that which we find comfortable, whether mental or physical, in order to bring the love of God to the people we are called to serve. and also for us to discover the love of God too. We're simply not called to be a holy huddle where we remind each other how right we are, but a missional people who love, learn and serve. So we are often called to be generous with our own comfort, to sacrifice it so that others can be loved and cared for. It is easier to do this when asked, but much harder to volunteer. Mary sees what she needs to do, puts aside her own comfort, and gets on and does it. The way Mary so generously gave of herself, her time, attention, wealth, talent, possessions, people's perceptions of her, and her comfort. It's an inspiration for us and an encouragement to do the same. By living more generously, we follow her example. We also come closer to the generous God who created us, a God who promises to be with us and help us to live ever more generous lives.